Philippines shakes apart in a 7.8 quake, and in just a few violent minutes, more than $2 billion in homes, roads, and buildings are wiped out as concrete turns to dust and steel bends like wire. Whole neighborhoods in Mindanao are shredded, while families, students, and workers watch the world they knew break open beneath their feet. Imagine waking up in a city like General Santos, a place of 720,000 people, and by lunchtime, parts of it look like a war zone. A 4-story commercial building that once held a busy grocery store is now a flat pile of debris, with rescuers crawling through the ruins, listening for the faintest sound of life. A Jollibee restaurant collapses beside a church that somehow stays standing, creating a surreal scene where a familiar red bee mascot sign lies twisted in front of an untouched cross. 60 kilometers away, an entire mountainside lets go and buries homes in the town of Glan, turning a quiet hillside community into a buried memory of mud, shattered timber, and crushed roofs. This is not just another earthquake headline that flashes once and disappears. The fault that broke is the same underwater monster that once sent a 9-meter wall of water into the Moro Gulf and killed thousands of people in the dead of night, while most of them were still asleep in their beds. This time, the tsunami is only about 1 meter high, but the difference between 1 meter and 9 meters has almost nothing to do with luck, preparation, or warning sirens. It comes down to a detail no one on land can see: how deep the rock broke under the ocean floor. That invisible choice beneath the seabed decides whether families have minutes to escape or never get the chance to open their eyes. And here is the chilling part. The same fault that just reminded the Philippines it is still very much alive sits almost right up against the coastline, offering almost no warning time when it finally unleashes its full power. The cities lining that edge, bigger, denser, and more built up than they were decades ago, are now standing on borrowed time, waiting for a wave that could arrive in as little as 2 minutes. So after $2 billion in damages, dozens of lives lost, thousands injured, and a coastline shaken to its core, one question hangs in the air over Mindanao and the entire country. If this was not the worst this trench can do, what happens when it finally is? This is the story of the 7.8 quake that shook the Philippines apart, and the hidden danger beneath the sea that is not finished yet. The earthquake struck without mercy, but it did not strike without a pattern. At 7:37 in the morning on Monday, June 8th, the start of an ordinary school day, children were lined up in neat rows for the flag-raising ceremony. Teachers were checking attendance, chatting with each other, and parents were heading to work. 20 kilometers off the coast of Sarangani province, beneath water that looked calm from the surface, the seabed suddenly lurched. The United States Geological Survey measured the event at magnitude 7.8, a size that almost guarantees the shaking will not stay local. Within seconds, the ground in General Santos began to roll. Windows rattled, then shattered. Walls cracked. People who had just started their morning routine were suddenly thrown from chairs, clinging to door frames, or sprinting for open ground as the sound of breaking glass and collapsing concrete filled the air. Those few seconds felt like forever, long enough for people to realize this was not just another small tremor that would pass. As the shaking tore through Mindanao, sensors across the Pacific picked up the disturbance. Within minutes, the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center had issued alerts warning that a tsunami was possible. PHIVOLCS, the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, began relaying urgent messages: move away from the shore, get to higher ground, do not wait. While those alerts spread across phones, radios, and televisions, the reality on the ground was already beyond words on a screen. By mid-morning, the first confirmed building collapses were reported. By the afternoon, the tsunami threat had passed and coastal warnings were lifted, but the land itself refused to calm down. A chain of aftershocks rolled through, some of them strong enough to be memorable quakes on their own. The largest, measuring magnitude 6.5, hit with enough force to send rescue workers stumbling back from unstable rubble piles, waiting for the ground to settle before stepping forward again to keep digging. The reach of this quake stretched far beyond the Philippines. The shaking was felt as far away as Manado, on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, more than 420 kilometers from the epicenter. A magnitude 7.8 earthquake does not respect borders or coastlines. It pushes energy outward in every direction, sending waves through rock, water, and eventually through the lives of people who never saw it coming. But to understand why this particular event matters so much, you have to go deeper, beneath the waterline, to the structure that caused it. The Philippines sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, a massive loop of fault lines and volcanoes that encircles the ocean like a scar drawn in rock. For people in the country, earthquakes, eruptions, and typhoons are not unusual. They are part of the background of life. Children grow up practicing earthquake drills. Families store emergency bags just in case. But the specific feature that broke on this Monday morning is called the Cotabato Trench, and it is one of the most dangerous pieces of that ring. The Cotabato Trench runs along the southwestern edge of Mindanao, just offshore. It marks the place where one slab of Earth's crust is being forced downward beneath another, a process called subduction. The plates do not slide past each other smoothly like glass on glass. They lock, they grind, they bend and store energy for decades, even centuries, like a metal bar being bent slowly until it finally snaps back. When that lock fails, the upper plate springs upward, and everything sitting on top of it, rock, sediment, and the entire column of seawater, gets shoved upward too. That sudden movement creates a tsunami. Here is what should keep coastal communities awake at night. The Cotabato Trench sits almost directly against the coastline. There is no wide stretch of open ocean between the break and the beach, no hours for a wave to cross before it hits land. When this fault sends a pulse of energy into the sea, the wave can arrive in 2 to 5 minutes. That is not enough time for a full evacuation campaign, not enough time for debate or hesitation. In many cases, it is barely enough time to run up a hill. This nightmare scenario has already played out once in history. In 1976, the same fault system ruptured beneath the Moro Gulf just after midnight. Most of the coastline was asleep. Within minutes, the seabed heaved upward, and a wall of water up to 9 meters high roared ashore, sweeping across more than 700 kilometers of shoreline. Entire communities were wiped away before people had time to register what was happening. The tsunami, not the initial shaking, caused roughly 85% of the deaths, killing as many as 8,000 people in a single, horrifying event. Monday's quake, the one that shredded parts of Mindanao, was nearly as powerful in magnitude. But one crucial detail was different: depth. This time, the rupture began more than 30 kilometers deep inside the slab, instead of around 20 kilometers down, like the 1976 event. When an earthquake breaks deeper, the seafloor does not lift as much. Less vertical movement means less displacement of water, and less displaced water means a smaller wave. In this case, the tsunami was roughly 1 meter instead of 9. That one variable, how deep the rock broke, was the main reason the coast saw 1 meter of water instead of a wall 3 stories high. It was not a new massive seawall, not a miracle of coastal engineering, and not a perfectly executed evacuation. It was simply the geometry of a crack in the ocean floor. Read that again. The difference between dozens of deaths and thousands may have been decided by where, in the dark rock beneath the sea, the fault let go. Even at 1 meter, the tsunami did not stay local. Instruments recorded 83 centimeters of wave height off Sulu, 30 centimeters in Palau, and ripples 20 centimeters high as far away as southern Japan. One earthquake on one trench pushed measurable waves onto the shores of 3 other nations. And this was still the smaller version of what this fault can do. But numbers and measurements alone do not crush people. Buildings do. In General Santos, the 4-story commercial building with a grocery store on the ground floor came down in seconds. People who had arrived to buy food for the week suddenly found themselves trapped in darkness, dust, and twisted steel. Rescue crews worked through the night, pulling 2 people out alive. A 3rd victim was found dead. By Tuesday, scanners and listening devices picked up no more signs of life from those still believed to be trapped inside, turning a frantic rescue operation into a grim recovery mission. Outside the rubble, families waited in the heat, breathing dust and exhaust, staring at the ruins that used to be part of their daily routine. One mother, Deslinda Duvio, stayed near the collapsed building, hoping for news about her son. She said it was painful to accept, as a mother, that he was still inside, and that all she wanted now was to have him brought out so the family could at least be together, even in grief. Her words cut through the noise of official briefings and statistics, showing what this disaster feels like at eye level. On a nearby road, 44-year-old Jojo Calma was driving when a building collapsed right in front of him. He had lived with earthquakes his whole life, but he said this was the first time he had ever felt shaking so strong that he could not stop himself from crying. As concrete fell and dust clouds rose, his thoughts went straight to his children and his niece. In that moment, the science of tectonic plates did not matter. Only the question of whether he would make it home did. East of the city, in the town of Melita, more than 100 students and a dozen teachers had gathered in the school courtyard for the flag-raising ceremony. It was the first day back after a 2-month summer break. There was chatter, laughter, and the usual buzz of a new school year. The principal, Roosevelt Cachuela, later said their excitement turned to trauma in an instant. The ground began to shake while the students stood in formation. Many of them stayed seated and still, following instructions from teachers and staff. That stillness, that simple act of doing nothing rash, became part of the reason none of them were seriously hurt, as structures around them rattled and cracked. At a hospital where the main building was no longer safe to enter, doctors and nurses had a choice: stop or adapt. They chose to adapt. They set up tents in the parking lot, under direct sun and on hot pavement, and continued treating the injured as aftershocks shook the ground beneath their feet. In one of those makeshift tents, a young mother gave birth, bringing a new life into a world that had just shifted beneath her. Amid the chaos, that single birth became a symbol of stubborn hope. By Tuesday, the confirmed death toll had climbed past 40. More than 450 people were injured, some with broken bones, others with crushed limbs, and many with deep cuts and bruises from falling debris. Roughly 2,000 homes and 117 government buildings were damaged or destroyed, and engineers expected the numbers to rise as they reached more remote communities. The economic damage was already being counted in the billions of dollars as homes, offices, schools, roads, and public buildings all showed fractures, tilts, and collapses that could not be ignored. General Santos was placed under a state of calamity, unlocking emergency funds, but also acknowledging publicly that the city could not handle this alone. Families who lost everything slept in vacant lots, schoolyards, and parking areas, using tarps and tents as makeshift roofs. They waited in food lines, charged their phones at generator-powered outlets, and checked news updates for any sign that things might stop getting worse. All the while, the ground continued to move with smaller quakes, each one asking the same silent question: is this another aftershock, or the start of something bigger? For engineers and inspectors, a different kind of race began. Around 6,000 school buildings sat empty and unchecked in the region, and each one of them needed to be inspected one structure at a time. Hairline cracks in walls, shifted columns, tilted floors. These were the details that would decide whether children could safely return or whether entire campuses would have to be rebuilt. The frightening truth is simple. The buildings that survived this 7.8 quake are the same buildings that will face the next one. Every unseen crack left unrepaired is a future failure waiting for its moment. The human cost of the disaster is not just measured in lives lost or injuries treated. It is also measured in how people's sense of safety is shattered. Students who once saw school as a safe, steady place now know that the ground beneath their classroom can twist without warning. Parents who used to worry about homework and schedules now worry about concrete strength and exit routes. Doctors and nurses who held patients' hands under shaking tents carry those memories with them long after the last aftershock fades. And this earthquake was not a freak, one-in-a-million event. Just 8 months earlier, a magnitude 6.9 earthquake struck off the central island of Cebu, killing 79 people. At the time, it was the deadliest tremor the country had seen in more than a decade. On top of earthquakes, the Philippines faces volcanic eruptions and absorbs around 20 typhoons every year. By almost any measure, it is one of the most disaster-exposed nations on the planet. Within that already harsh reality, the Cotabato Trench stands out as its own specific threat. It has ruptured before. It has produced one of the deadliest tsunamis in the country's history. It will rupture again. And the cities that have grown along that coast since 1976, especially General Santos, are now far larger, denser, and more built up than they were back then. There are more people, more homes, more malls, and more high-rise structures standing between the population and a fault that offers almost no warning time at all. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. said that the national government was moving and would not leave Mindanao behind. Relief goods, soldiers, police, and medical teams poured into the damaged areas. Rescue teams climbed over debris, cutting through twisted rebar and crawling into dark gaps, while helicopters scanned landslides and damaged villages from above. But beneath the visible response, a harder truth sits quietly. FIVO-LCS director Teresito Bacolcol confirmed that this was the strongest earthquake to strike the Philippines this year. International wire agencies called it the most powerful to hit the country since the 1976 Moro Gulf disaster. Put simply, the same fault that produced one of the deadliest tsunamis in Philippine history has now just reminded everyone that it is still fully capable of breaking lives and cities. It has not released all its energy. It has only reminded everyone that it is still there. The tsunami warnings are gone for now. The immediate crisis phase, the frantic rush to pull survivors from rubble and move people off the beach, is slowly giving way to the long, grinding work of recovery. The airport is closed. Flights are canceled or diverted. Around 6,000 schools sit empty, their futures waiting on inspection reports. Families who used to sleep under solid roofs now lie awake under tarps, listening for the next rumble. And the aftershocks have not stopped. Each new jolt sends dust drifting down from cracked ceilings and reminds everyone that the story of this quake is not over. Somewhere off the coast of Sarangani, more than 30 kilometers below the surface, the slab that broke on Monday is settling into its new position. The Cotabato Trench, the same trench that has killed thousands before, has not moved away. It sits exactly where it has always been, a permanent, invisible presence off the coast of Mindanao. It is not finished. For the Philippines, the challenge now is deeper than just clearing rubble and reopening roads. It is about accepting that this level of risk is not temporary. Stronger building codes, serious retrofitting of older structures, strict enforcement near shorelines, and tsunami evacuation plans that assume only a few minutes of warning. These are not optional upgrades. They are the difference between a disaster that kills dozens and one that kills thousands. Because beneath the cement floors, under the classrooms, grocery stores, church walls, subdivisions, and coastal resorts, the same forces are still at work. Plates continue to lock and bend, storing strain like a wound-up spring. One day, the Cotabato Trench will move again. No one can say exactly when, but everyone who lives along that coast now has to live with the same heavy question. When that moment comes, will their city be ready, Or will the Philippines once again watch its shoreline crumble and its people run out of time? But even as officials talk about codes and plans, the reality on the ground comes down to simple, human decisions in the worst moments of fear. In village after village along the coast, people are starting to ask hard questions. If the wave can arrive in 2 to 5 minutes, where exactly do we run? And how fast can we get there? For some families, the answer might be a nearby hill or a concrete rooftop. For others, there is no obvious high ground at all, just flat neighborhoods squeezed between the sea and the road. In those places, the difference between life and death may depend on something as basic as practice. Community leaders are now talking about regular tsunami drills, not just yearly ceremonies. Children learning, from a young age, that if the shaking is strong and you are near the sea, you do not wait for a siren, a text, or an announcement. You move. You run inland or uphill the moment you can stand. That survival muscle memory, knowing where to go and doing it automatically, may matter more on that day than any speech from a politician. For coastal businesses, the lesson is equally tough. Restaurants, resorts, and shops that rely on a view of the water are also directly in the path of any incoming wave. Owners are now being forced to think about backup plans, emergency ladders to higher floors, rooftop access points that stay unlocked, staff trained not just in customer service, but in evacuation leadership. An ordinary morning in a beachfront restaurant can turn into a race against a wall of water in under 5 minutes. In that race, every second and every clear instruction counts. Local governments, especially in places like General Santos and the towns along Sarangani Bay, are also under pressure. It is not enough to declare a state of calamity after the fact. People are asking for visible concrete steps, public maps showing safe zones, well-marked evacuation routes, sirens that are tested regularly, and community meetings where experts explain, in plain language, what the Cotabato Trench can do. The science is complex, but the message has to be simple. When the ground shakes violently and you are near the coast, you head for higher ground immediately. At the national level, planners and scientists face a different kind of pressure: time. No one knows when the trench will rupture again at a shallow depth, but the clock is clearly ticking. The 1976 event, the 7.8 quake that just struck, the 6.9 tremor near Cebu 8 months earlier, all of these are reminders that the system is active now, not just in the distant future. That means decisions about infrastructure, zoning, and disaster budgets are no longer theoretical debates. They are choices that will decide how many people survive the next major rupture. Engineers are already talking about retrofitting older buildings, especially those built before modern seismic standards. Hospitals, schools, and government offices sit near fault lines and shorelines all across the country. Strengthening them is expensive, but leaving them weak is far more costly when they fail. In a country where budgets are tight and needs are endless, every peso spent on prevention is a hard sell until an earthquake like this one hits. Then the cost of not preparing becomes visible in collapsed roofs, crushed vehicles, and lines of families waiting at evacuation centers. There is also a psychological battle ahead. After a disaster, it is natural for people to want to move on, to treat the event as a one-time tragedy and hope it never repeats. But the Cotabato Trench does not think in human terms. It does not keep a calendar. It simply stores strain until it fails again. For the people living along its edge, that means learning to carry both grief and awareness at the same time. Grieving what was lost in this quake, while also accepting that the risk is not gone. In evacuation centers and temporary shelters, that tension is already visible. Parents reassure their children that things will get better, even as they admit to each other that they are scared of sleeping indoors. Kids play games on cracked basketball courts while talking about the day the ground tried to throw them down. Elderly residents remember past disasters, the 1976 wave, older quakes, past typhoons, and quietly compare them to what they just survived. For them, the question is not whether nature can be deadly. They have seen that many times. The question is whether people will finally take that threat seriously enough to prepare. Around the world, scientists are also watching. The behavior of this 7.8 quake, its depth, the size of its tsunami, the pattern of its aftershocks, will all feed into studies of subduction zones and near-field tsunami risks. Other nations with trenches close to their coasts, Japan, Chile, New Zealand, and more, are paying attention, because the same physics apply to their shores too. A fault that sits right next to land, with very little ocean in between, gives the same cruel challenge everywhere. You must be ready to act before a warning system can fully respond. For the Philippines, this earthquake is both a tragedy and a message carved into stone. It shows how quickly a normal morning can become a disaster, how deeply a crack in the ocean floor can tear through human lives, and how narrow the line is between a deadly event and an unimaginable catastrophe. It also shows something else, the courage of rescue workers who step back during aftershocks and then step forward again, the calm of teachers who keep students still and safe, the determination of doctors who deliver babies in tents while the earth still moves. Those acts of courage do not remove the danger of the Cotabato Trench, but they prove something important. When the next rupture comes, and it will, the outcome will not be decided by geology alone. It will also be decided by what the Philippines chooses to do now, how it rebuilds, how it prepares, and how seriously it listens to the warning delivered by this 7.8 quake. Because somewhere offshore, in the darkness beneath the waves, the plates are already moving again, slowly, silently, storing energy. The question that hangs over General Santos, over Sarangani, over every coastal town along that trench is simple. When the seabed lurches next time, will the country still be caught off guard, or will it already be running for higher ground?